This 100% audio-only book summary narration uses an AI-generated voice. Welcome to Videobook's YouTube channel. I won't ask you to like or subscribe, because I know you've already done that. I'll ask you to comment where you're watching the video from. Tell me in the comment box, so YouTube will help me to reach a similar people like you. The Introduction of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert B. Cialdini opens with a personal and deeply relatable confession from the author himself. He begins by admitting that he has long been an easy mark for compliance professionals, the kind of person who, despite considering himself reasonably intelligent, consistently fell for the persuasive tactics of salespeople, fundraisers, and marketers. This frustration, the feeling of being taken advantage of by those who could make him say yes when his better judgment said no, was the catalyst for a 3-year-long journey of discovery that would eventually become the foundation of this landmark book. Cialdini, a respected psychologist, decided to stop being a victim and instead become a student of the very forces that were manipulating him. He wanted to understand the hidden psychological mechanisms that prompt people to agree to requests, and he wanted to uncover the secrets of the most effective persuaders. To conduct his research, Cialdini adopted a unique and immersive methodology. Instead of relying solely on laboratory experiments, he went into the field and became a participant observer. He took on various entry-level jobs in professions where persuasion is the primary tool of the trade, working undercover as a used car salesman, a fundraiser, a telemarketer, and a recruiter, among other roles. He underwent the same training as his colleagues, learning the tricks and techniques that compliance professionals use to make a living. This allowed him to observe the tactics in their natural habitat and to understand not just what they did, but why it worked. He also conducted hundreds of formal interviews with these professionals, seeking to distill the essence of their persuasive power. His goal was not to uncover 1,000 different tricks, but to find the fundamental psychological principles that underpin them all. Through this extensive research, Cialdini identified 6 fundamental weapons of influence, or principles, that consistently lead people to comply with requests. These principles are not new inventions. They are deeply ingrained psychological rules that govern human behavior. Cialdini argues that each of these principles is based on a powerful instinctual tendency that has evolved over time to help us make quick, efficient decisions in a complex world. He calls these automatic responses click-whir reactions, where a specific trigger feature will cause us to respond in a predictable, mechanical way. This is a form of mental shortcut that is essential for survival, but it also makes us vulnerable to anyone who knows how to activate these triggers. The 6 principles are reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. The introduction makes clear that this book is not just a guide for salespeople or marketers. It is a book for anyone who wants to understand the hidden forces that shape their own decisions and to protect themselves from those who would use these principles unethically. Cialdini emphasizes the importance of recognizing these tactics when they are being used against you. He argues that we are often oblivious to the subtle pressures that lead us to agree to things we would normally refuse. By understanding the principles, we can become more discerning consumers, more effective communicators, and more aware citizens. The introduction sets the stage for a journey into the psychology of persuasion, promising to reveal the mechanisms behind why we say yes and to equip the reader with the knowledge to navigate a world full of professional persuaders. The stage is set and the rules of influence are about to be unveiled. The introduction ends there. Chapter 1 of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, titled Weapons of Influence, lays the crucial groundwork for the entire book by introducing the core concept of automatic, almost robotic human behavior that can be triggered by specific cues. Robert B. Cialdini begins by explaining that we all have what he calls click-whir responses, a term borrowed from the behavior of animals. He illustrates this with the example of a mother turkey who will care for any creature that makes the cheep-cheep sound of her chicks, even if that creature is a natural enemy like a polecat, demonstrating the power of a simple trigger to activate a fixed action pattern of behavior. This is the first of 3 key components of the weapons of automatic influence: the ability to activate a powerful force with a single trigger feature. Cialdini argues that humans possess the same kind of automatic response mechanisms. We use mental shortcuts, stereotypes, and rules of thumb to navigate the overwhelming complexity of modern life, making decisions based on a single piece of information rather than a full analysis. The chapter then delves into the idea that while these mental shortcuts are essential for efficient functioning, they also leave us vulnerable to those who know how to exploit them. Cialdini supports this with the well-known study by social psychologist Ellen Langer, which demonstrated that simply using the word because when asking for a favor significantly increases compliance, even when the reason given is weak or nonsensical. This is because the word because acts as a trigger feature, cueing our automatic response to comply with a request that has a reason attached, regardless of the reason's quality. This is the second component, how easily these weapons of influence can be used to gain compliance. Those who understand these triggers can manipulate others with minimal effort and often without the target realizing they are being influenced. Cialdini gives the compelling example of a jewelry store owner who accidentally doubled the price of some turquoise jewelry, only to see it sell out quickly as customers, relying on the stereotype that expensive equals good, assumed it was of superior quality. The stereotype, a mental shortcut, was exploited, leading to a surge in sales. The chapter introduces the third component of these weapons, the ease with which exploiters can use them to manipulate others, and the subtlety of this manipulation, often so seamless that those being influenced are completely unaware of what is happening. Cialdini then presents a powerful metaphor, jujitsu, to describe the most sophisticated form of influence. Just as a jiu-jitsu fighter uses an opponent's own strength and momentum against them, a master of influence can trigger the great stores of influence that already exist in a situation and direct them toward their target without appearing pushy or manipulative. The chapter closes with an introduction to the contrast principle, another powerful weapon of influence. This principle states that the perceived difference between two things is magnified when they are presented one after another. For example, after a man buys an expensive suit, a relatively expensive sweater will seem much more affordable than it would if presented alone, leading to greater sales of accessories. By the end of Chapter 1, Cialdini has established the fundamental framework of the book, revealing that we are often not the rational decision-makers we believe ourselves to be, and that understanding our automatic responses is the first step to both recognizing and defending against the levers of influence that shape our choices. Chapter 2 of Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion, titled Reciprocation, the Old Give and Take, delves into the first, and arguably one of the most potent weapons of influence, the universal human tendency to repay debts, favors, and concessions. Robert B. Cialdini opens the chapter by establishing the rule of reciprocity as a fundamental pillar of human society. He explains that the rule is so deeply ingrained in our social fabric that it is present in every culture around the world. It dictates that we should try to repay in kind what another person has provided us. This simple, powerful rule has been essential for human survival, enabling the division of labor, the exchange of goods and services, and the formation of social bonds. Cialdini argues that the rule of reciprocity is so powerful that it can trigger a feeling of indebtedness even when the initial favor is unsolicited or unwanted. The feeling of obligation is so strong that it can lead us to comply with requests that we would otherwise refuse, creating a profound sense of discomfort until the debt is repaid. The chapter then explores a key implication of the reciprocity rule, the incredible power of uninvited favors. Cialdini illustrates this with the memorable example of the Hare Krishna Society, which used to give a small gift, a flower or a book, to people in airports before asking for a donation. Even though the recipients did not ask for the gift, the rule of reciprocity was activated, and they felt compelled to give something in return. The compliance rate skyrocketed compared to when they simply asked for a donation without the preceding favor. This demonstrates that the rule is triggered by the act of giving, not by the quality or desirability of the gift. The feeling of indebtedness is automatic and powerful, often overriding our rational assessment of the situation. This principle is a cornerstone of many marketing and sales strategies, from free samples to free consultations, all designed to activate that automatic sense of obligation in a potential customer. The chapter then introduces a more subtle and equally potent application of the reciprocity rule, the tactic of rejection then retreat. This is a concession strategy where a requester makes an extreme initial request that they know will be refused, followed by a more moderate actual request. Because the requester has made a concession, the target of the request feels a psychological obligation to reciprocate by also conceding. Cialdini illustrates this with a classic experiment where participants were asked to volunteer for a 2-year commitment to a mental institution, a request that was universally refused. When the same participants were then asked to volunteer for a much smaller commitment, a 2-hour chaperone trip, compliance skyrocketed compared to a control group that was only asked for the smaller request. This tactic works because the concession, even though it was not a genuine compromise but a planned strategy, triggers a powerful sense of obligation to reciprocate. It also establishes a sense of responsibility for the final agreement, making the target feel more committed to the outcome. The chapter closes with a discussion of how to defend against the rule of reciprocity. Cialdini cautions against simply refusing all initial favors, as this would be socially isolating and impractical. Instead, he advises that we should be aware that the rule is being activated and to recognize that the initial favor is not a gift, but a compliance tactic. If we accept a favor, we are likely to feel obligated to return it, but we can choose to reframe the situation. If we believe the initial favor was a compliance tactic, we can mentally neutralize its effect. The key is to recognize the strategy and not to feel obligated to repay a manipulative gesture. By understanding the rule and its applications, we can protect ourselves from being exploited while still benefiting from the genuine cooperation that reciprocity can foster. The chapter ends with the powerful reminder that the rule of reciprocity is a fundamental social norm, but like all weapons of influence, it can be wielded for both positive and manipulative purposes. The chapter ends there. Chapter 3 of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, titled Liking the Friendly Thief, explores the profound and often underestimated principle that people are more likely to be persuaded by those they like. Robert B. Cialdini begins by stating the simple but powerful truth that we are far more inclined to say yes to a request from someone we know and like. This principle is so fundamental that it is a cornerstone of many social and professional interactions. The chapter then delves into the specific factors that cause us to like someone, and how these factors can be deliberately manipulated to gain compliance. The first factor is physical attractiveness. Cialdini cites numerous studies that show we automatically assign favorable traits, such as talent, kindness, and intelligence, to people who are physically attractive. We are more likely to help, trust, and agree with them. This halo effect is a powerful, unconscious bias that can significantly influence our decisions, even when we are not aware of it. The chapter then explores the second factor, similarity. We like people who are similar to us, whether in terms of opinions, personality, background, or lifestyle. This is why salespeople are often trained to mirror their customers' behavior, to find common ground, and to emphasize shared interests. The principle of similarity can be as simple as a salesperson noting that they grew up in the same town or share a hobby with the customer. The feeling of connection creates a sense of trust and rapport that makes us more receptive to their suggestions. The third factor is praise, or the simple act of giving compliments. We are naturally drawn to people who compliment us, even if we suspect the compliments are not entirely sincere. The act of flattery, whether genuine or not, triggers a positive emotional response that makes us more likely to comply with their request. This is why salespeople and politicians often begin interactions with a sincere or calculated compliment. The chapter then introduces the fourth factor, familiarity. We tend to like things that are familiar to us. This is why repeated exposure to a person or product often increases our positive feelings towards them. In the context of persuasion, this is why salespeople often try to establish a connection through repeated interactions, building familiarity and trust over time. The fifth factor is association. We tend to associate people, products, and ideas with positive or negative events. This is why companies pay celebrities to endorse their products, connecting the positive feelings we have for the celebrity with the product. Similarly, we are more likely to like someone who is associated with good news or success. Cialdini illustrates this with the concept of lunch, where we are more likely to agree with someone during or after a meal, because we associate the positive feelings of eating with the person we are with. The chapter closes with a discussion on how to defend against the principle of liking. Cialdini advises that we should be aware of the factors that create liking and to consciously separate the feeling of liking a person from the decision to comply with their request. We should ask ourselves if we have a legitimate reason to like the person, or if we are being influenced by irrelevant factors like their physical appearance or a shared interest. By recognizing the tactic, we can effectively neutralize its power, making a more rational decision based on the merits of the request rather than our feelings for the requester. The chapter ends with the reminder that while liking is a genuine and valuable human emotion, it can be a friendly thief that steals our ability to make objective choices. The chapter ends there. Chapter 4 of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, titled Social Proof, Truths Are Us, explores the powerful principle that people often look to the actions and beliefs of others to determine what is correct, especially in situations of uncertainty. Robert B. Cialdini begins by explaining that social proof is a mental shortcut that helps us navigate the complexities of life. When we are unsure about how to act, we look to the behavior of others as a guide, assuming that if many people are doing something, it must be the right thing to do. This principle is a fundamental part of human psychology, a legacy of our evolutionary past where following the group was essential for survival. Cialdini illustrates the concept with the classic laugh track used in television comedies, which is a form of social proof designed to cue the audience that a joke is funny, making them more likely to laugh. The mere sound of laughter, even if it is artificially generated, triggers our automatic response to follow the crowd. The chapter then delves into a key aspect of social proof, its power in ambiguous situations. Cialdini cites the well-known study by social psychologist Stanley Milgram, which demonstrated that people are more likely to help a person in distress if they are alone, rather than in a group. This phenomenon, known as the bystander effect, occurs because in a group, individuals look to others to see how to react. If no one else is helping, they interpret the situation as not being an emergency. The presence of others creates a state of uncertainty, and the lack of action from others serves as social proof that action is not needed. Cialdini emphasizes that social proof is most influential when the situation is ambiguous, when people are uncertain about the correct course of action. In these moments, we are highly susceptible to the influence of others, assuming that they have information we lack. The chapter then explores how social proof can be manipulated to gain compliance. Cialdini uses the example of the list technique, where a charity fundraiser will present a list of people who have already donated, often with the names of prominent community members, to encourage others to contribute. The list acts as social proof, demonstrating that giving is the norm and the expected behavior. The chapter also discusses the children see, children do phenomenon, where children often mimic the behavior of their peers, demonstrating how powerful social proof is in shaping behavior from a young age. Cialdini also examines the phenomenon of copycat suicides, where a widely publicized suicide can lead to a spike in similar incidents, as people use the publicized suicide as a model for their own behavior. This highlights the destructive potential of social proof when it is focused on negative behaviors. The chapter closes with a discussion on how to defend against the principle of social proof. Cialdini advises that we should be aware of the situations where we are most vulnerable to this influence, particularly in ambiguous or uncertain circumstances. He suggests that we should be cautious when we see others acting in a certain way, especially in situations where we are not sure what to do. We should ask ourselves if the people we are following are truly knowledgeable or if they are just as unsure as we are. The key is to rely on our own judgment and critical thinking, rather than blindly following the crowd. By recognizing the power of social proof, we can make more informed decisions and resist the pressure to conform when it is not in our best interest. The chapter ends with the reminder that social proof is a fundamental part of human interaction, but it can be a dangerous tool when exploited. The chapter ends there. Chapter 5 of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, title Authority, Directed Deference, delves into the powerful and often unexamined human tendency to obey those in positions of perceived authority. Robert B. Cialdini begins by establishing that deference to authority is a deeply ingrained social norm, a shortcut we use to make decisions efficiently in a complex world. We are taught from childhood to respect and obey those who hold authority, whether it is parents, teachers, or law enforcement. This respect for authority is essential for the functioning of society, allowing for order and coordination. However, this automatic deference can be manipulated by those who appear to be authorities, even when they are not. The chapter explains that the principle of authority is so powerful that people will often obey commands from an authority figure even when they are asked to do something harmful or unethical, as demonstrated by the famous Milgram experiments, where participants were willing to administer potentially lethal electric shocks to a learner simply because an authority figure told them to. The chapter then explores the specific symbols of authority that trigger our deference. Cialdini identifies 3 key symbols: titles, clothing, and trappings. Titles are one of the most powerful symbols of authority. A person with a title, such as doctor, professor, or CEO, is often seen as more knowledgeable and credible, even if the title is not relevant to the situation. This is why con artists often use phony titles to gain trust and compliance. Clothing is another powerful symbol. A person in a uniform, such as a police officer, security guard, or even a business suit, is often perceived as having authority. Studies have shown that people are more likely to comply with a request from a person in a uniform, even if they do not know that person. The third symbol is trappings, such as expensive cars, jewelry, or well-appointed offices. These material symbols suggest success and power, which often translate into perceived authority. These symbols of authority can activate our automatic deference, making us more likely to comply with requests without questioning their legitimacy. The chapter then discusses how the authority principle can be manipulated in everyday situations. Cialdini uses the example of the Milgram experiment, where participants were willing to obey an authority figure even when it meant causing harm to another person. He also discusses the Bushman and the doctor study, where participants were more likely to follow the instructions of a doctor, even when they knew the instructions were incorrect. These examples demonstrate that the deference to authority is so powerful that it can override our own judgment and ethical considerations. The chapter also examines how advertisers and salespeople use the authority principle to sell products, by featuring experts, celebrities, or people in uniforms to endorse their products. The authority of the endorser is transferred to the product, making it seem more credible and desirable. The chapter closes with a discussion on how to defend against the principle of authority. Cialdini advises that we should be aware of the symbols of authority, and to question whether the person we are dealing with is a legitimate authority in the relevant area. We should ask ourselves if the authority is truly an expert, or if they are simply using the trappings of authority to gain compliance. The key is to separate the person from their title or appearance and to evaluate the request on its own merits. By recognizing the power of authority and the symbols that trigger it, we can protect ourselves from being manipulated by those who would use it unethically. The chapter ends with the reminder that while respect for authority is essential for a functioning society, it must be tempered with critical thinking and a healthy skepticism. The chapter ends there. Chapter 6 of Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion, titled Scarcity, the Rule of the Few, explores the powerful principle that people place a higher value on opportunities, items, and information that are perceived as limited or scarce. Robert B. Cialdini opens by establishing the universality of the scarcity principle, noting that it is deeply ingrained in human psychology and is often used by compliance professionals to drive demand. He illustrates the principle's potency with a simple but revealing study where participants were given a jar of chocolate chip cookies to taste and rate. Some received a jar with 10 cookies, while others received a jar with only 2. All the cookies were identical, but those who received the jar with only 2 cookies rated them as more desirable, more attractive, and worth a higher price than those who received the abundant supply. This demonstrates that scarcity creates value, even when the item itself is unchanged. The joy is not in experiencing the scarce commodity, it is in possessing it. The principle is rooted in our instinctive understanding that things that are difficult to obtain are typically better than those that are easy to get. The chapter then delves into the psychological mechanism behind the scarcity principle, a concept known as psychological reactance. Cialdini explains that we are motivated to preserve our freedom of choice, and when a freedom is threatened or limited, we experience an aroused state of reactance that makes us want to possess the threatened item even more. This is why we desire things more when they are restricted or forbidden. The response to censorship is a classic example, where banning information often leads to greater desire for it and a more favorable attitude towards it than before the ban. We tend to believe that information we think we cannot get elsewhere is more persuasive. Cialdini argues that this fight against restriction is not limited to tangible objects, but extends to ideas and speech as well, ironically leading to the opposite effect of what those who imposed the restrictions intended. The chapter then identifies 2 specific conditions that make the scarcity principle even more powerful. The first is new scarcity, where an item becomes more desirable when its availability is reduced from a previously abundant state rather than if it had always been scarce. This explains why we often value things more when we perceive we are about to lose them, a phenomenon that is exploited by marketers who create artificial deadlines or limited-time offers. The second condition is competition for scarce resources, where the desire for a scarce item intensifies when we are in a contest for it with others. This is why real estate agents will often tell a potential buyer that other parties are also interested in a property, or why online retailers display only 2 left-in-stock messages. The combination of scarcity and competition creates a powerful emotional response that can override rational decision-making, and this principle may even be a contributor to asset price bubbles in stocks, real estate, and other markets, as individuals fear they must buy, or they will not get any. The chapter closes with a discussion on how to defend against the scarcity principle. Cialdini advises that we should be alert for the rising tide of arousal that accompanies the thought that an item is scarce, using it as a signal to calm ourselves and step back from the emotion of the moment. When we feel the urgency that scarcity creates, we should ask ourselves whether we actually want the item for its own sake, or if we are simply reacting to the fear of missing out. We should remind ourselves that scarce things do not taste, feel, or work any better because of their limited availability. The key is to separate the feeling of urgency from the decision to comply, and to evaluate the request on its own merits. By recognizing the power of scarcity and the tactics used to exploit it, we can protect ourselves from making impulsive decisions that are not in our best interest. The chapter ends with the reminder that the scarcity principle is a fundamental part of human psychology, but it is a tool that can be wielded for both positive and manipulative purposes, and that awareness is the first step to resisting its pull. The chapter ends there. Chapter 7 of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, titled Commitment and Consistency, Hobgoblins of the Mind, delves into one of the most powerful and pervasive weapons of influence, the deep-seated human drive to be and appear consistent with our past actions, statements, and beliefs. Robert B. Cialdini opens the chapter by explaining that the desire for consistency is a fundamental and automatic mental shortcut that helps us navigate the complexities of life. He notes that consistency is highly valued by society. People who are consistent are seen as stable, rational, and trustworthy, while those who are inconsistent are often perceived as unpredictable and unreliable. This social pressure, combined with the cognitive ease of following a set path, creates a powerful internal force that drives us to align our future behavior with our past commitments. This drive is so strong that it can lead us to persist in a course of action even when it is no longer in our best interest. The chapter then introduces the concept that the principle of commitment and consistency operates through a click-whir response, where a trigger feature, making a commitment, activates an automatic and nearly mechanical behavior, the drive to be consistent. Cialdini illustrates this with several key studies. The first is the famous toy study by Jonathan Friedman, where children who were given a mild threat not to play with an attractive toy developed an internal commitment to avoid it, while those given a severe threat only obeyed while the threat was present. The mild threat, which did not provide sufficient external justification, led the children to adopt the belief that they simply did not want to play with the toy, a self-generated reason that persisted long after the threat was removed. This demonstrates that commitments are most powerful when they are active, voluntary, and public, as they generate their own internal justification, creating a legs for the belief that make it stand on its own. The more effort we put into a commitment, the stronger it becomes. We internalize the belief that the effort was worthwhile, justifying the action by convincing ourselves we wanted the outcome. The chapter then explores the foot-in-the-door technique, a classic application of the commitment principle. This tactic involves starting with a small, easy request that is almost certain to be accepted, and then following it with a larger, more significant request. Because the target has already agreed to the initial commitment, they feel a psychological pressure to remain consistent and agree to the subsequent request. The two requests do not even need to be related, as the principle is based on a general change in self-perception. Once a person has agreed to a small request, they begin to see themselves as someone who is helpful and cooperative, making them more likely to agree to a larger request. Cialdini also discusses the low-ball technique, where an initial attractive offer is made to secure a commitment, and then the terms are changed after the commitment has been made. The target, having mentally committed to the decision, often proceeds with the transaction anyway, even though the original deal has been withdrawn, because entirely backing out feels inconsistent with their initial decision. The mental investment in the decision, the excitement and positive justifications that were generated, make it difficult to walk away. The chapter closes with a discussion on how to defend against the principle of commitment and consistency. Cialdini advises that we should be aware of the signals that indicate a commitment is being manipulated. He recommends paying attention to stomach signs, EO, the physical feeling that something is off, and heart-of-heart signs, a deeper internal check to determine if, knowing what we now know, we would make the same decision again. He also suggests that we should ask ourselves if a commitment was made freely or if it was coerced or manipulated. If we feel we have been tricked into a commitment, we should recognize that the drive to be consistent is not serving us, and we should have the courage to walk away. By recognizing the tactics used to secure commitments, we can protect ourselves from making decisions that are not in our best interest. The chapter ends with the powerful reminder that while consistency is a valuable trait, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, and it is a trap that can be exploited by those who understand its power. The chapter ends there. Chapter 8 of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, titled Unity, The we is the shared me, introduces the sixth and final principle of influence, a concept that extends beyond mere liking or similarity to tap into a deeper sense of shared identity. Robert B. Cialdini begins by explaining that unity is the feeling that we are one with others, a sense of we-ness that transcends individual differences. This principle is rooted in the human need for belonging and connection, a fundamental drive that shapes our attitudes, behaviors, and decisions. When we perceive someone as part of our we group, we are more likely to trust them, cooperate with them, and be persuaded by them. Cialdini argues that this principle is distinct from liking, as it is not based on personal affinity, but on a shared social identity, a sense that we are all part of the same tribe, family, or community. This we identity can be based on a wide range of factors, including ethnicity, nationality, religion, political affiliation, or even shared experiences and common enemies. The chapter then explores the key factors that create a sense of unity. Cialdini identifies two primary categories: kinship and shared identity. Kinship or family ties is one of the most powerful sources of unity. The bond between family members is so strong that it creates an automatic sense of obligation and trust. The chapter discusses how family members are more likely to help, support, and forgive each other, and how this bond can be exploited by those who claim a family connection or who trigger feelings of kinship. Shared identity is the second category, encompassing any group that individuals feel a part of, whether it is a nation, a religion, a sports team, or even a brand. Cialdini cites the work of social identity theory, which demonstrates that people derive a sense of self-esteem and belonging from their group memberships, and that they are more likely to favor and trust those who share their group identity. This is why we are more easily influenced by people who share our values, beliefs, or backgrounds. The chapter then examines how the principle of unity can be activated to gain compliance. Cialdini discusses the concept of in-group versus out-group dynamics, explaining that we are more likely to be persuaded by people we perceive as part of our in-group. He gives the example of how salespeople often try to establish a sense of shared identity with their customers, using phrases like we and us to create a feeling of unity. He also discusses the power of common enemies, where a shared adversary can unite disparate groups and make them more susceptible to influence. The chapter also explores how shared experiences such as surviving a crisis or participating in a team-building exercise can create a powerful sense of unity that fosters cooperation and persuasion. Cialdini argues that the more we see ourselves as sharing a common identity with someone, the more we are likely to be influenced by them, a principle that is fundamental to many social movements and political campaigns. The chapter closes with a discussion on how to defend against the principle of unity. Cialdini advises that we should be aware of the ways in which a sense of we-ness can be manipulated. He suggests that we should question whether a connection is genuine or being manufactured to gain our compliance. We should ask ourselves if we truly share a sense of identity with the person who is trying to persuade us, or if they are simply trying to exploit our need for belonging. The key is to be cautious about those who claim to be part of our we group, especially when they are asking us to do something that seems out of line with our own interests. By recognizing the power of unity, we can protect ourselves from those who would use it to manipulate us. The chapter ends with the reminder that unity is a powerful force for good, fostering cooperation and social cohesion, but like all weapons of influence, it can be exploited for personal gain. The chapter ends there. Chapter 9 of Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion, titled Instant Influence, Primitive Consent for an Automatic Age, serves as the concluding chapter of the book, synthesizing the previous 6 principles and examining the broader implications of automatic shortcut decision-making in the modern world. Robert B. Cialdini opens the chapter by revisiting the fundamental concept introduced in Chapter 1, the click-whir response, the automatic, almost mechanical behavior triggered by a single piece of information. He reminds the reader that this mental shortcut, which he calls primitive consent, is not a flaw, but a necessary adaptation to the overwhelming complexity of modern life. We are bombarded with more information, choices, and demands on our time than our cognitive resources can fully process. In response, we increasingly rely on a single, usually reliable feature of a situation to make a decision, rather than engaging in a complete analysis. This is the essence of instant influence. Cialdini argues that the pace of modern life has created a paralysis of analysis, because technology evolves faster than our natural capacity to process information. We are increasingly inadequate to handle the abundance of change, choice, and challenge. We find ourselves in the position of lower animals with a mental apparatus that is not equipped to deal thoroughly with the intricacy and richness of our environment. The consequence is that we will less frequently engage in a fully considered analysis of the total situation and instead revert to a focus on a single, usually reliable feature. This is why the 6 principles of influence, reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity are so powerful. Each by itself provides a highly reliable cue as to when we will be better off saying yes instead of no. When we don't have the inclination, time, energy, or cognitive resources for a complete analysis, we use these lone cues to make our compliance decisions. The problem arises when those normally trustworthy cues are manipulated by clever compliance practitioners, leading us to erroneous actions and wrong-headed decisions. The chapter then explores the modern applications of instant influence, demonstrating how digital tools and marketing strategies tap into these automatic processes. Social media platforms leverage instant influence through notifications, badges, and the clever placement of like buttons, prompting users to click, share, or engage without reflection. E-commerce sites use countdown timers and urgent stock warnings to create a sense of scarcity and urgency, making it seamless to make a purchase in seconds. Personalized recommendations and persistent ads reinforce the feeling that speed is essential. Digital communications such as email sorting tools and push notifications also spur automatic responses, with users directed by subject lines or sender names, skipping deeper analysis if the mental cue suggests trustworthiness or urgency. These examples highlight how the principles of influence are not just theoretical concepts, but are embedded in the very fabric of our digital lives, constantly shaping our decisions without our conscious awareness. The chapter closes with a discussion on how to defend against instant influence. Cialdini does not advocate for abandoning mental shortcuts entirely, as they are essential for efficient functioning. Instead, he advises that we should be aware of the signals that indicate a decision is being made on autopilot. He recommends building in occasional pause points, especially for major decisions, to allow for a more thorough evaluation. He suggests that we should question the urgency of a request, asking ourselves if the time pressure is genuine or artificially created to manipulate us. The key is to distinguish between the moments that benefit from swift, intuitive reactions and those that require thorough evaluation. By recognizing the power of instant influence and the tactics used to exploit it, we can enjoy the benefits of automatic decision-making while avoiding the pitfalls of unchecked impulses. The chapter ends with the powerful reminder that knowledge is the best defense. By understanding our primitive consent mechanisms, we can protect ourselves from those who would exploit them, and make decisions that are truly in our best interest. The chapter ends there. The Conclusion of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert B. Cialdini brings the book to a powerful and practical close, reinforcing the central message that understanding the hidden forces of influence is essential for navigating the modern world. Cialdini revisits the 6 key principles: reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity, emphasizing that these are not just abstract psychological concepts but real, powerful tools that shape our daily decisions. He reminds the reader that these principles are deeply ingrained in human nature, rooted in our evolutionary past, and are essential for social cooperation and efficient decision-making. However, he also stresses that these same principles can be, and often are, exploited by skilled compliance professionals who use them to manipulate our choices for their own benefit. The defense against such manipulation is not to become cynical or to reject all attempts at persuasion, but to become aware of the triggers that activate these automatic responses and to learn to recognize them when they are being used against us. By understanding the psychology of influence, we can become more conscious consumers, more effective communicators, and more discerning citizens, capable of making decisions that are truly in our best interest. The conclusion also reflects on the ethical implications of the principles of influence. Cialdini distinguishes between the legitimate use of these principles, where they are used to build genuine relationships and facilitate mutually beneficial exchanges, and their manipulative use, where they are employed to deceive and exploit. He argues that the principles themselves are neutral, but their application can be either ethical or unethical depending on the intent of the user. He encourages readers to use their knowledge of influence not to manipulate others, but to protect themselves from manipulation and to build more honest and authentic connections based on trust and mutual respect. The book ends with a call to action, urging readers to apply the insights they have gained to their own lives, to become more aware of the persuasive forces that surround them, and to use their understanding to make better, more informed decisions. The conclusion serves as a final reminder that knowledge is power, and that by understanding the mechanisms of influence, we can take control of our own choices and navigate the complex landscape of persuasion with confidence and clarity. So concludes the summary of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert B. Cialdini. If you enjoyed this detailed chapter-by-chapter journey through the psychology of persuasion, please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. By subscribing, you will have access to more in-depth summaries, analyses, and literary explorations like this one. And if you found this summary helpful, please do us a favor and like this video, share it with your friends, family, or anyone else who might be looking for a comprehensive breakdown of this influential and practical book. Your support helps us continue to bring you quality content. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.